Christian couple that you want in Tuscumbia, right? Because they're teaching in Downtown Bible. They're going on the events with the young at heart. They're involved in every service, every Bible class. They'll be back tonight and they'll be here Wednesday night too. They're people who love God. They have a life of righteousness, but they have an inability to have children. In this culture, the first century world, that was probably seen as being something that, well, something must have bad have happened to you in your life, and God is giving this you as a punishment. A little later in the life of Jesus, he'll be walking by and he'll see a man that's blind. And his apostles will look at him and say, hey, who sinned, this man or his parents, that caused him to be blind? Right? That's a world that said bad things happen to you because you are spiritually bad. But Jesus corrects that. He said, no, this is not a problem of sin. It wasn't his sin or his parents' sin, but this is so that the glory of God can be shown to you, that you can see the glory of God. And so you look at the trials, the obstacles, the hurdles in our life, and we say, well, why am I dealing with this? My sin? No. But it might be so that God's glory can be seen through it. That people can see the faithful way that I approach that. The way that I come with faith rather than fear. And God can be glorified no matter the obstacle or the hurdle that's in my life. You see that this has caused a problem in the life of Elizabeth, because afterward, when she's told she's going to have a child, notice verse 25. We'll get here in a moment. But in verse 25, Elizabeth says, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me and taken away my reproach among the people." The fact that Elizabeth wasn't able to have children in this culture was embarrassing to her. Now, our world has kind of shifted from that, and there are many families that choose not to have children, and that's fine. But in this first century world, Elizabeth said, hey, people look at me differently because I don't have children. They're righteous, but they still are dealing with obstacles or hurdles or things that are uncomfortable for them in life. This is a side note, by the way, but I think I want to bring it up here. You look at Luke chapter 1, and it teaches us that no matter what your family looks like, you can still be faithful to God. Right? You've got a Christian couple here, a faithful couple under the Old Testament law who have no children, but they still serve God. You see people in the Bible like Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, a couple that has children, they still serve God. You see people like Paul, who's single, never married, and still serves God. You see single parents like Timothy's mother, who his father either wasn't all that good of a father or not part of the picture, but single parents and children still serving God. I don't know what your family situation looks like. There's probably a lot represented here. But regardless of your family's circumstances that sometimes are out of our control, you can still serve God, right? What a beautiful picture of a faithful man and woman who are loving and serving the Lord here. Let's keep reading in verse 8 as we see him serving God, but shaken in the midst of that. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of people were praying outside at the hour of incense. Now, I want us to dive into that for just a little bit because we skipped that to get to where we're going in chapter 1. Did you notice back up in verse 5, Zechariah is a priest of the division of Abijah. If you want to do some reading on that, you can look in 1 Chronicles chapter 24, and it gives us all the divisions of the priests. 24 of them. 24 divisions of priests. Verse 8, it was now his division's turn to be in Jerusalem to serve in the temple. And of his division, Zechariah was chosen by lot to be the man that gets to go inside. We think about the priesthood, and it's broken up into several ways. You have the high priest that serve. Under him are chief priests. But the majority of priests are just common priests. That's what Zechariah is. And then there are a multitude of Levites that are not priests. But these common priests, during the time of Jesus, there were about 7,200 of them, divided up into 24 lots. Now, we're talking numbers here, so don't lose me here. Each of those 24 lots would come to Jerusalem to serve in the temple 2 weeks out of the year. The other weeks of the year were festival weeks, Passover, Pentecost. Everybody came to Jerusalem then. But in just a normal week, these 24 lots would go for 2 weeks out of the year to serve. When you get there, they choose by lot one man to go in and serve in the temple. I say that to say there would have been a lot of priests that never got to go in the temple. A lot of priests, 7,200 of them, that were just hoping by lot their name was drawn from the hat. For Zechariah, walking into the temple is a big deal. This is him getting called up to pitch in the majors. There are a lot of pitchers in baseball, but only a few of them get their chance to take the mound in a major league game. Here's Zechariah. He's been waiting his whole life for this moment. His hometown, people are going to be talking about it. Hey, did you hear Zechariah got chosen? He's serving in the temple. He walks into the temple. He's probably nervous. He's probably rehearsing in his mind what he's going to do. But he knows he's going to be alone. Only one person gets to go in there by lot. However, when he gets inside, he's not alone. Keep reading, verse 11. And there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. I'm serving, but I'm shaken with fear at the presence of this angel. The angel said, verse 13, do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. You'll call his name John, and you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great among the Lord, and he must not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. He will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, and to turn the hearts of the fathers to the Lord, a people prepared. Zechariah goes into the temple. He's expecting to be alone. This is his moment, and an angel's there and tells him this amazing news. You're going to have a child. You're going to name him John. He's going to be this forerunner. He's going to prepare the way for the coming of the Lord. And Zechariah says, yeah, but how do I know? Right? Yeah, but how do I know that's really going to happen? I'm old. My wife is old. We haven't had children all our life. How do I know? As if talking to an angel in the temple of God isn't enough, right? How am I going to know? You remember in this same chapter, in comparison with Matthew chapter 1, Mary is going to be told, you're going to have a child. She's not a priest. She's young. And she asks a logistical question, how can that happen? Because I've never been with a man before. I'm not even married. Zechariah is in a different circumstance. He's married. He's old, has wisdom in life. He understands the situation. He's talking to an angel. He's a priest. Zechariah would have known the story about Abraham and Sarah, who were old and didn't have the ability to have children, and God sent messengers to them. You're going to have a child. Zechariah would know the story of Hannah and Elkanah, unable to have children, and her prayer to the Lord, and God say, I hear your prayer, and you'll have a son named Samuel. Zechariah, as a priest, would have known the Old Testament, and he would know Malachi chapter 4. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with decree of utter destruction. Malachi 4 is a prophecy that the angel basically repeats in verse 16 and verse 7. Verse 16 and verse 17. I'm sending Elijah to prepare the hearts of the people for fathers and children, to turn them to the Lord. Zechariah would have known that passage. And as he hears all these things that God is offering him, he wants to ask, well, how can I know? I know the truth. I don't have the trust. I know the word, I know the stories, I know the passages, I just don't trust it. But faith, church, is more than just knowing the truth. Faith is more than just knowing the book. It's putting our trust into that. He's serving, but he's shaken. And so after Zechariah asks that question, how can I know this? The angel gives him an answer and also gives him a sentencing. Verse 19. The angel answered, I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and bring you this good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. And the people were waiting for Zechariah, and they were wondering at his delay in the temple. And when he came out, he was unable to speak, and they realized he had seen a vision in the temple. And he kept making signs to them and remaining mute. And when his time of service was ended, he went to his home. After these days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she kept herself hidden, saying, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me and taken away my reproach among the people." Zechariah is told what I have said is going to take place, and you're going to be quiet until it does. You're not going to speak. And walks out of the temple. The people are basically looking at their watch saying, "What's taking him so long in there? He should be out by now." When the priest would walk out of the temple, he would offer the blessing that the sons of Aaron were supposed to offer. In Numbers chapter 6, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace." Zechariah is supposed to walk out of the temple and give that blessing, but he can't speak. He's making these signs or these symbols with his hands and his arms or however he's making them, and people saw that and said, "This man has seen something special. He's been in the presence of God, a sign that he has been among the Lord." How would you feel if you couldn't speak for 9 months? Some of you can't speak for 9 minutes, but how would you feel if you couldn't speak for 9 months? You think you'd learn to listen? Imagine if you couldn't speak for 9 months because of your lack of faith. You think you'd learn to trust? We are people who oftentimes don't take time to listen. I heard it said of somebody one time that you can't have a conversation with them because they don't listen. They're already thinking about what they're going to say next. You might know somebody like that. They're always thinking about what they're going to say rather than really listening to you. But silence is an important tool. You can go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and sit in this anechoic chamber. It's said to be the quietest place on earth. It was built in a laboratory there, and the longest anybody has ever lasted inside is 45 minutes. After 45 minutes, you start hallucinating because the room is 99.99% quiet. It's built out of steel and concrete walls. It has these fiberglass things inside that absorb all the sound. And so you go in there, and your mind, your body is expecting to hear because we hear things all the time. But when you're in dead silence, your mind starts making you hear things that aren't actually there. The creator of this room, here's what he said. "We challenge people to sit in the chamber in the dark. When it's quiet, ears will adapt. The quieter the room, the more things you hear. You begin to hear your heart beating. You begin to hear your lungs breathing. You hear your stomach gurgling. In the chamber, you become the sound." The quieter the room, the more things you hear. Sounds pretty similar to the words of God in the book of Psalms. "Be still and know that I am God." We're right here in the middle of a busy holiday season in which nothing is still and nothing is silent, except for when we sing Silent Night. Let me challenge you to take some time to be still and to be silent. Because in his silence, Zechariah learns to hear. In his inability to speak, Zechariah learns to listen. Not just listen to what God's word says, but to do it. In Luke chapter 1, the story shifts to the birth of Jesus and the foretelling of that. But Zechariah's story is continued in verse 57. And we'll close as we think about the end of his story, the celebration at the birth, but also some confusion that's taking place there. Verse 57. "Now at the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son, and her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her. And on the 8th day, when they came to circumcise the child, and they would have called him Zechariah after his father, but his mother said, 'No, he'll be called John.' And they said to her, 'None of your relatives is called by this name.' And they made signs to his father, inquiring what he wanted him to be called. And he asked for a writing tablet, and he wrote, 'His name is John.' And they all wondered. And immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God. And fear came upon all the neighbors, and all the things were talked about through all the hill country of Judea. And all who heard them laid them up in their hearts, saying, what then will this child be? For the hand of the Lord was with him. You keep reading the rest of that chapter, and you read Zechariah's blessing, his prophecy, his message from God. I love that the first thing Zechariah says is praise and blessing to God. After 9 months of silence, what would you want to say to somebody? Zechariah wanted to talk about God. He wanted to bless God. All the family gathers around to celebrate the birth. And he's born, and they say, oh, look, there's little Zach Jr., right? There's little Zechariah. Because in this culture, you name the son after the father, especially if you're only going to get one of them. Right? They're old and aged in life. Children were beyond what they thought were possible. And God has blessed them with a son. Oh, you better name him after his dad. Elizabeth says, no, I'm going to name him John. And they say, well, the only reason you get away with that is because your dad can't talk. If Zechariah could talk, he'd tell you something different, right? And he writes down, no, his name is John. They're confused by that. But in being obedient to what the angel had said back in chapter 1, he says in verse 13, you are going to have a son and you're going to call his name John. And when Zechariah does what the Lord told him to do, his silence is turned into speech again. It's not just about knowing. Zechariah knew. He knew the law well. It's about doing. Not just knowing, but also being willing to do. Faith, yes, faith is about truth, but faith also is about trust. How's your trust this morning? You probably have read or seen the story of someone like Charles Blondin. Charles Blondin's the guy that walks across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. He walks across, and most people walking on a tightrope put a safety net underneath to catch them if they fall. But Blondin said, I'm not going to do that because that's just preparing to fail, and I don't plan to fail. So he didn't put a net up. Walked across the falls. He got to the other side, and he walked backwards. He got a wheelbarrow and pushed a wheelbarrow across. And you remember the famous little example. He asked the crowd that had gathered, do you believe I can do this? Yeah, we believe you can. You believe I can push a wheelbarrow? Yeah. Who wants to get in the wheelbarrow? Right, and nobody raised their hand. But Blondin did some pretty impressive things as well. He carried a table and chair and piece of cake across that wire, got over the middle of that tightrope, balanced the table and chair, and sat down and ate a piece of cake. One time he carried a cooking stove on his back, got halfway across,